So I'm going to hand over to Khaya. He's going to try and see how he can shorten our discussion summary, because we'd like to allow some time also for the breakaway rooms. We'll just give you an overview of how it works once he's done.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It was so interesting, when you're listening to the sequence of inputs that have been made up to this point. We've had an entrepreneur sharing her own experience and journey, which actually confirms that it is possible to do it, because she's a living case in our session. But I think also what came out as specific pointers to her journey were focus, passion, and dedication, which has actually led to her success. And I do recall her parting shot of statement was that they continue to improve and they continue to grow the concept. And therefore, with a mix of our audience today being startups and also those that are actually aspiring to grow their businesses and looking at the franchising model, the testimony by Ms. Jaune was actually confirming that it is possible to do it. Secondly, as we looked at the input by Ms. De Amico, it was clearly indicative that looking at franchising as a business model, whether you are developing your own franchise or you are buying into an existing brand, it is important to look at the legalities. And specifically, reference was made to legislation that actually must regulate these relationships. The Consumer Protection Act was actually mentioned, but of critical importance was also the whole issue of the requirements that you should apply yourself to. One being the actual agreement, which should actually stipulate and articulate the parameters of how you relate between yourself as a franchisor and the franchisee. What came out very interestingly was actually something that we overlook, the cooling off period. Because sometimes, when we sign documents, we think that all is done and dusted. But Maria, I think that input was quite critical, just to make sure that as we continue to explore different business models, we do have a legal right to say, let me review. But unfortunately, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that there are timeframes that are linked to those cooling off periods. Again, looking at the model itself, there are specific requirements, obviously, which have been confirmed by Ms. De Amico's input, that this relationship that is generated between a franchisor and a franchisee has to be documented, as one has indicated that a franchise agreement would actually clearly articulate the requirements. It is of critical importance also to look at compliance with the Consumer Protection Act, because in this relationship, the franchisee becomes the consumer of a business model. And I have actually been observing some of the questions that have been coming through the chat box, which are very preemptive, that as part of the way forward, we need to ensure, that continued engagement, because that also shows the appetite that the audience has, to explore doing business, through a franchising model. As she was actually continuing to make her inputs, reference was made to an institution that she's actually heading or chairing, which is the Franchise Association of South Africa. She did share information that what the Franchise Association is, being a membership body, and what the requirements are, and shared some of the activities that are upcoming, of which I think part of sharing that was to ensure that people take advantage of participating in those events or activities. I think as the inputs were flowing from a testimony looking at the legalities of franchising. We also had inputs from two banks, which is ABSA and Standard Bank. What came out very saliently was the appetite, to support, the franchising space. And particular reference was also made to certain areas because the Eastern Cape is largely rural. So it was interesting to hear, the banks, indicating that their appetite also lies, with your rural and peri-urban areas, because that's where, our previously disadvantaged SMEs or enterprises are located. So it is of critical importance that we look at that as a possible area of, collaboration, because as the AIDC Eastern Cape, we are striving towards reaching those areas to make sure that distribution of services actually reaches those areas. It was very interesting, the very last slide from ABSA, which indicated that empowering Africa's tomorrow together. This is a platform that is aimed at ensuring that we create those collaborations. And because as the CEO was actually given the opening address, he indicated that this is a continuous effort by the AIDC to share information and knowledge about various models that are aimed at empowering enterprises. And the reason why we're having these institutions that are part of this event today is to foster that collaboration, to make sure that we actually reach out to support SMEs in the automotive aftermarket space. I think also of critical importance, the makeup of the event itself is preemptive of what needs to be done next. And some of the questions that are actually coming through are very suggestive of us, having continued engagement with yourselves, obviously through various media. The CEO indicated that the original intention was to hold this interest is also to continue such kind of engagements on a face-to-face basis. And I think that's one other area that we'll actually be looking at, just to make sure that the networking and business-to-business linkages objective is ensured. In summary, also, it was also, without putting more emphasis on franchising as a business model, some of the advantages were shared by both institutions, which actually give comfort that your risk is actually minimized when you actually consider, buying a franchise model. And one of some of the reasons or advantages that were cited was, the support that you'll get from the franchisor. Also, empowerment initiatives such as getting you trained to understand the nuts and bolts, of running that franchising business. And also the fact that it's a business model or brand that has been tried and tested. So at least when you consider buying into a franchise, you are buying into a business idea that has already been operating for some time, and it has a proven track record of operating effectively. And again, obviously, when you look at getting into or starting a business, you always are wary of failure. So looking or getting into a franchising business model, you obviously would minimize the risk of failure, because as I've indicated, it is a concept or idea that has been tested. It was also very interesting to look at, the contributions of the franchising model, because some numbers have been indicated around, the contribution of the franchising sector, which shows that it is a sector that is contributing meaningfully to job creation. And I think when our CEO was giving us his address. Mention was made of job creation, which is one of the most critical inputs into the economy. And obviously, everybody's dream is obviously to create wealth, and therefore getting into a model of this nature would contribute to that vision. It was also interesting to see some of the models that have been shared. For the first time that we heard that you can actually order fuel, which I think is a day-to-day consumption. For example, it presents an opportunity for aspirant franchisees to look at such model, because we still are using internal combustion engines, which are basically using fuel. And we know sometimes to reach out to places that actually supplying fuel, sometimes it becomes a challenge. So some of the models that have actually been shared are providing convenience, and they present possibilities to explore franchising as a model, for our enterprises to look into. Colleagues, at this point, as Anel has indicated, the program director, we are going to summarize the deliberations or conversations into a form of a report, which will highlight the deliberations that actually took place in this virtual event. Based on the discussions and questions that have been raised, it is clear that we need to resolve that there has to be continued collaboration with the banks. Given the nature of questions that have been raised about access to finance, I know some of the questions were not necessarily related to franchising, but they are very expressive of the fact that we need to collaborate around issues of facilitating access to finance, which re-emphasizes one of the critical outcomes of our last year's event. Secondly, there was an expression that was made in the chat box that clearly indicated that there is a need for similar type of engagements, and I think it emphasizes one of the points that was raised by the CEO, that we need to have also, some kind of face-to-face engagement, so that we are then able, to facilitate your business-to-business linkages, but also active networking amongst ourselves. So we certainly, as the AIDC, because we do also have a program that is targeting SMMEs, which we regularly advertise as a call for expression of interest to participate in the program. And some of the activities within that program are aimed at addressing some of the questions that have actually been raised. But obviously, as we move forward from a franchising concept point of view, we also will be looking at topics that are actually specifically zoomed based on our analysis of the questions that have actually come through, and craft interventions that are responsive to those questions and comments. So these are the two indicators of a need for further engagement, because of critical importance was knowledge sharing and information, which I think we have achieved, and it has pricked, some of the questions that we would like to, engage further on. So certainly we will stay closer to yourselves and, communicate opportunities for similar networking and information sharing purposes. On that note, we would like to thank you, the speakers, Ms. Jaule, Mrs. Amiko, Mr. Litsalo, Mr. Bibi, Mr. Kaya, Madiba, for spending time with us and sharing, the valuable information. We certainly will continue, engaging with yourselves in order to make sure that we keep the pulse of knowledge and information sharing with the wider sector. On that note, I would like to thank you all and have a very wonderful afternoon.